So I've just come back from a week's liverboard, diving in Egypt in the south of the Red Sea, chasing some sharks. And this was my underwater videography setup. So inside of this case I've got a Panasonic LX100 Mark I. They do a Mark II now, which is a really highly improved camera over the first one. The case is a Sea Frogs underwater housing, and I have a extension arm, 6-inch extension arm with ball head joints with a 200 pounds 4200 lumen video light. So the camera itself I'll come on to in a second, but the case, I'll talk about the case. 450 quid thereabouts for this case. It might be varying price, depends where you get it from, Amazon or on Sea Frogs itself. It's made from pretty much solely from plastic. There are a few metal components on it, but not a lot. The front lens on it is plastic, so it can scratch easy. I've had this for quite a few years now and I've got away with it so far, but there are a lot of reports of people using various dome ports and things that can get scratched quite easy because it's just a fairly basic kind of plastic. But the way this lens cover is actually made, it's got quite a thick beveled edge, so even when it's laying down on its front, it's not actually going to interfere with the surface you're laying it down on. You still have to be careful though, and I still make sure it's all covered up when I'm travelling with the case. The case came with a handle which I've then added on the ball joints to then finally upgrade it to what I did for this trip with the video light, because it's something I never used before with regards to lighting. The case ergonomically is okay. You get what you pay for with these things. Nauticam and iClide do some phenomenal cases for all types of cameras. They're aluminium body molded to the camera, and it's very, very ergonomic. It's almost like just a slightly thicker version of the camera you're using underwater. Normally I'd want to use everything in manual settings, however I found that to try and use this setup in manual is not very user friendly. So you've got a wheel on the side here to be able to change the focus settings. You've got a wheel on the front here that can change the aperture. You've got your shutter button, you've got your zoom knob here, you've got your shutter speed rotational dial here, on off switch, and a few other little bits and pieces there. On the back of the camera you've got various things like the record button, different function buttons, the main wheel. These all work pretty well, absolutely no problems with them at all. I did find that for the first few dives, going down to about 30 odd meters, the pressure on the case was stopping the main record button working properly. It was feeling like it was sticking. They normally feel okay, but it was just maybe the age and wear and tear on the case itself. A bit nervous of the fact that I was like really giving it some real attention and really pushing that button really hard and thinking, what if I pop the seals and just see the camera filling up with water at 30 meters? There's not a lot I can do. But what I found, weirdly enough, was just to make a little tweak on the aperture at the front. And for some reason it must have just seated the camera nicely, and the arms, there's basically arms on the back of the button, so you push the button and an arm then pushes the button on the back of the camera. That then made it operate properly. So that's the case itself. Externally to that, like I've mentioned, I've got the extension arm going to a light. This particular light is very affordable, really good bit of kit. However, you're going to find quickly that you've got limitations with something as small as this. Now 4,200 lumens sounds like a lot, but in terms of underwater videography it is nothing. Typically you'd have two probably 8,000, 10,000 lumen lights with two separate arms with weights balancing the whole camera rig out and all that kind of stuff. So this is quite a small setup, but it's a setup that I'd be more inclined to go to over just a GoPro, purely for the fact that the camera inside as well gets you a better image than a GoPro, and the lens is different to a GoPro as well. The GoPro lenses are very wide, whereas this type of camera you can zoom in as well to get a better shot of your subject. Buoyancy of the case is important to talk about as well. I don't personally give it too much of a thought with the buoyancy of this particular case. I'm just kind of pointing and shooting, just rolling with what I've got. I've not really spent any time in making sure it's all balanced. The reason why I have the arm in this position is this was the setup I was using pretty much all the time underwater, and I found that it gave a nice balance to the camera. It feels quite nice in the hand. However, I've not gone to the effort, like I said, of actually making sure it's all neutrally buoyant. So if I was to let go of this in the water, even though I have this tethered to me, so I have this onto my BCD and I can unlatch this and operate the camera and see the back LCD display, if I let go of it, the camera would then just want to go up to the surface. Not horrendously, I'd be able to control it, and I can control total buoyancy with myself, but that's not a perfect setup. If you really want to get the refined setup, then You can go online, you can buy weights or floats or anything like that. You can look at the displacement of the case with the camera in, and you can make sure you've got it absolutely refined, so underwater, if you let go of it, it just stays in front of you. You can just nicely push it away. That helps out massively for stable shots and stable images as you're moving through the water, and it just means that if you do need to remove your hands for whatever reason, it's going to be there in front of you. So the camera itself, as I've mentioned before, it's a Panasonic LX100 Mark 1. It sits inside the housing. Like I said, it's quite a chunky housing, so you've got all this housing for basically just that camera there. One thing I will mention about inside the case before I talk about the camera is you have a water sensor which sits down in the bottom right hand corner. Mine's bust, it's never worked. If that light lights up when you're underwater, you can kiss your camera goodbye, because basically you've got a problem with your housing. The camera itself, really good bit of kit. They do a new version of this which has got an improved sensor, more megapixels for the camera. It has got a zoom function to it as well, like I mentioned before, so it will zoom in and zoom out. It's got the equivalent zoom from 24 to 17 mil. It is a micro four thirds sensor for this camera, so it's not going to give you as much shallow depth of field as a full frame camera, but for something that's around about 250 quid on eBay, that's a really good bit of kit, and it will give you a much better image than on a GoPro. Like I mentioned before, I wanted to use this camera in manual, so I took white balance cards to make sure that all that was set. The case was my limiting factor. It was very difficult to set up the camera in manual underwater, so you can quite easily just put the aperture to auto, stick it in intelligent auto, and I'll be honest with you, 4K 24 frames in auto does a phenomenal job. Really recommend this camera, this setup, and like I said, for under £1,000 it's a really good go-to setup, something that I would choose to go for over a GoPro, but that's just me. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any questions about my setup, or if you want to know more about any pros and cons with the setup, then just stick a comment in the comments below and I'll get back to you.